the Alonso negotiation took a while. In your opinion, what was it at the end that finally got it to cross the finish line?
Look, I think both parties want to get it done, and that's a really good foundation for a deal. We're thrilled to have Pete back. I think Pete is thrilled to be back. He was here briefly the other day for his physical, and you could see the genuine excitement that he had to be back in this building, and we're really happy we were able to make it happen.
There's been a lot of talk about the meeting you guys had in Tampa with Steve and Scott and Pete and yourself. What was the key message that you as an organization wanted to get across to him in that meeting?
I think we just want to ensure that he knew we wanted him back. And I think he wanted to express the same to us. I think he wanted to express his desire to come back. And it was important, I think, for both sides to hear that. These are long negotiations. There's a lot of back and forth. And if you're going to make a deal, I think it's important for both sides to really feel and hear that both sides are very invested in the deal.
Why do you think, if not those wires got crossed, why do you think there was maybe an uncertainty from either side that, this was a marriage that you both wanted to happen?
Look, it's a long negotiation, and I think you never really know how free agent processes are going to play out. And so Pete had earned the right to evaluate different opportunities. We were certainly active in the free agent market this year in a variety of different ways. And so ultimately, I think both sides felt like this was the right resolution, and we're certainly really happy we got there.
Around the time that you guys signed Winker, and I think Minter was around that same time, did you think at that time that Pete was still going to be a Met? How realistic was it in your mind?
I didn't know. I at that point in time, I would have said that there was a very real possibility that he was going to end up elsewhere. But ultimately, we're thrilled that we were able to continue discussions and get a deal done.
What did you make of the way the market overall valued Pete Alonso?
I don't really make much of it. I think free agency can be kind of a weird thing, and players can be valued differently by the market in free agency at different points in the same offseason, certainly valued differently by the market in different off seasons. So this is kind of where it landed, and we're really pleased to be able to bring him back.
Well, acknowledging that the roster is always evolving over the course of the full season, do you expect that you're pretty much done off-season work-wise as far as key additions, major additions?
I think so. Look, we're always going to be involved in conversations. We're always going to be trying to see if there are ways we can get better. We also feel really good about the group we have that's reporting right now, and I would anticipate, by and large, this is the team we're going forward with.
Hey, David, why ultimately was short-term the right arrangement for the Pete Alonso deal?
I think for both sides, just given how we were looking at it, how Pete was looking at it, each side's going to have different objectives. And clearly the length of contract is one objective, AAV is another objective. And you try different structures on either side. And this was the combination of AAV, structure, and length that overlap for both sides. And I think it works well for both sides.
David, there's a perception, fair or not, that you personally didn't want Pete back, but Steve pushed hard for it. Why did David Stearns think Pete should be back here as the Mets first baseman?
Yeah, he makes us a better team. I mean, there's no question he makes us a better team. We're in a spot where we feel like we've got a really good team. We're trying to win as many games as possible. Pete makes us better.
As far as that position, I mean, Pete's kind of become, an anomaly a little bit because teams kind of shift guys in and out of there. Are you comfortable with having kind of that traditional slugger type in their
Yeah,
offensive.
with a player who produces at the level that Pete produces, absolutely.
Dave, I think about 2 weeks before it got done, you guys were at Amazing Day at the Fan Fest, and Steve made no bones about saying that he didn't like the structure, he didn't like the negotiations. In 2 weeks, how much heavy lifting did that have to get that down to a place that you were comfortable with? Was that a lot of coming down on their side, or did you feel like it was more coming together thing?
I think it's coming together, and it's both sides sincerely working towards an objective. I think what Steve felt, what Steve said was very authentic, and it's the way he felt. And at times during negotiations, you're going to have disagreements. And we were at a point in the negotiation where there's a pretty significant disagreement about what we were looking at. And Steve expressed that. But we kept working at it, and they kept working at it, and ultimately we got to a good spot.
Steve is, I guess, still relatively new comparatively since he bought the team at doing what he does. You've been a long time in this baseball game. Was that weird to see your owner say that in like a public setting like that, or?
No, I look. Steve wants to be transparent. Not every owner does, and so there are clearly rules that govern what we can say. And so I think what Steve did was be as transparent as he possibly could without breaking any rules. And I applaud him for doing it and appreciate him doing that.
Hey, Dave. How was that for you to work with an owner that from our perspective, seems to be very active in negotiations and wants to be at the negotiating table? Is that something that you had to deal with in Milwaukee, for example, and just how does that work for someone like you?
I think Steve is very invested in ensuring that players know that we want them, and is very invested in having a personal relationship with a player. And that's what he expresses in these negotiations. I think that's why it is important for him to meet with players. Like we met with Juan Soto, going down and talking to Steve, to Pete, I think just accentuates the personal touch that he and Alex want to place on the team, want to place on the organization. And from my perspective, that's an enormous benefit for the organization.
And just on a kind of a side note, Mark mentioned today that he's going to continue taking reps at first. Do you guys envision Pete playing 162 over at first base like he did last year, or do you want to see some guys kind of share the load over there?
Look, I don't know that we ever go into a season expecting a player to play 162. That is really tough to do. I imagine Pete is going to do everything in his power to play 162, but we also have to be prepared for what happens and the randomness that happens over the course of a Major League season.
Pete's had a couple relatively strange seasons, for him at least. One year his batting average was down. Last year home runs were down a little bit, but his batting average was back up. What do you make of his last two seasons, and what leads you to believe that he can get back on sort of a more normal track for him these next few?
He's a really motivated player right now. He's a very motivated player to have an elite Pete Alonso season. And I expect we're going to see that. I think he's very confident in his abilities, and I'm excited to watch it.
David, he played under the pressures of a walk year last year as well. You're placing him right back in that situation, essentially. What makes you comfortable doing that with him?
Look, I don't personally think, and we can ask him, I personally don't think the walk year impacted him. I mean, I never got the sense that contractual pressures were impacting him last year. Certainly, this is a player who has repeatedly proven in big moments he can play under pressure. He's played in New York his entire career and handled the pressure. So that frankly for me is not of concern at all.
Why is, in your words, Pete Alonso so motivated to have an elite Pete Alonso year?
Look, I think he wants to win. I mean, I think what he expressed to us is he wants to win a World Series as a Met. And he knows a big part of our ability to do that is him producing. I think Pete's had good years the last couple of years, but not as good, not as elite, not at the standard that he set at the front end of his career. And I think he is very motivated to demonstrate that he is capable of putting up those types of numbers.
In response to the free agency ad, you mean?
No, not necessarily. I think
Is he more motivated now than he was a year ago?
I don't think so. I mean, you can ask him that, but I think Pete's a pretty motivated player, and regardless of how this offseason played out for him, I think he was going to come into this year wanting to win a lot of games, wanting to win a World Series, and I think that's the player we're getting.
How did his social club compare to some of the other places you've closed deals?
We didn't actually close it there, but it was pretty impressive. It was pretty impressive. That was a unique meeting setting, and a cool spot.
What is this, just in terms of, I know you guys have your internal projections of what the team is supposed to do. How do you feel like you are stacking up right now against the Phillies, against the Braves, against the top teams?
It's going to be really tight. I mean, this is a really good division. The Braves and the Phillies are two very good teams. We think we're a very good team. We got our work cut out for us. There's no question about that. This is a very, very good division. We got a ton of respect for those two teams, and we got to go out and perform at a really high level to be right there with them.
Do you feel like you have the tools to be better than them?
I feel like we can be better with them, but there's nothing guaranteed. I mean, we got to go out and perform. The Braves are going to win more games than they won last year. The Phillies are a really good team that's going to be highly motivated again this year. So we know the battle we're about to enter. I think we're excited by it, but we know it's going to take a very strong effort from our entire roster.
For a long time, I think every team's goal at the start of spring training was to win their division. Given the expanded postseason, that winning the NL East has not proven beneficial to the last couple teams that did it. Is that still as big as primary a goal as it used to be?
Look, I think the first round bye is a big deal, and I know it hasn't always proven that way in this new playoff format. I think over time, we get into a 10, 15-year stretch of this, and we will see that being a big deal. So I still think that's a big deal. The biggest deal is getting in. Like, you want to keep playing, regardless of how you do it, but being able to skip the first round is a big deal.
And then in your second year, does this roster feel any more like a David Stearns team or a David Stearns organization than it did last year?
Look, I don't think we're ever going to get to like a point where it's a David Stearns team or a David Stearns organization. Like, this is the compilation of a number of different people, a number of different regimes contributing to where we are right now. And look, I think we're going into the season with a pretty good team. We're also far from a perfect team. We're going to continue to work to get better. We're going to ask a lot of our players. We're going to challenge our players to get better. And just like every season, we're going to do our best to make upgrades where we can throughout the season.
How close, if at all, were you to bringing back Iglesias this winter? And it seems at this point that maybe you've moved on. What's going on? What's going into that decision?
Yeah, I think where we are now for that role on our team, it's important for us to keep some avenues open for some of our younger players. We think it's important for us to have some roster flexibility with that spot. It's really tough to freeze your entire position player roster. we did that for a portion last year, and we actually kind of got away with it. But there very easily could have been a circumstance where we got stuck with a completely frozen position player roster. And so having some flexibility there in that role is frankly probably needed for us right now.
Dave, how has your teamwork with Steve been so far? I mean, he brings a certain element to it. You bring a certain element to it. It seems like you guys work together pretty well in figuring out what would be a good deal for Pete Alonso. Do you think you guys have done a pretty good job complimenting each other in the past year plus that you've been?
Yeah, I've enjoyed working for Steve. I mean, he's been a tremendously supportive owner. He cares deeply about winning. He cares deeply about this organization. When you're sitting in my job, that's all you could ask for. And he's providing us every resource we could need to put a consistently very high caliber team on the field.
What kind of down roster implications does the move of bringing Pete back, kind of for some of the younger guys, kind of closing up a hole? What does that kind of impact have on the roster as a whole?
Sure. Look, it's a spot that is now guaranteed to go to one player, and so there's a little bit less. There's one fewer open spots on the roster, and so that is going to impact some of our young players. Look, they understand it. We've talked to them about it. It creates probably a little bit more competition here in camp. We also know, and I talk about it every year, the roster on opening day is a roster for one day. We're going to go through 60-plus players, and we're going to need all of them to contribute over the course of a season. And so I would imagine all of these young players that are in the mix for this final spot or two on the roster are going to impact our team in a material way over the course of the year, even if it's not on opening day.
How do the internal projections for the 2025 Mets right now compare to what your internal projections were a year ago?
I'm not going to comment on our internal projections or what we're looking at. I'll say I think we're a pretty good team. I like where we are as a team, and I'm looking forward to watching us play.
How do you feel about the team now versus the team a year ago? Do you like it better on paper? Not as much? About the same?
I'll speak as an organization. I like where we are as an organization today. I think we've taken steps forward as an organization in the entirety, and that's inclusive of where our major league team is at. Where that ultimately ends up 7-8 months from now, really tough for me to predict. But I like where our organization is. I like where our major league team is. I'm excited for camp. And really excited to just get this going and watch baseball.
Sort of jumping off there, where do you think the organization has made strides, and where would you like to see it continue to make strides?
Yeah, I'd like to think we've made strides across the board in our operation. I'm very pleased with where we are from a player development standpoint, some of the processes we've implemented there. Some of the people we've brought in have been very happy with our amateur scouting work over the past year. I think we had a really quality draft last year, and that's something that's going to become continuously important, but also continuously difficult as we pick farther and farther down, and where our payroll is and is likely to continue to be. We're losing 10 spots every year in the draft, and so finding good major league players farther down the draft becomes very important for us. So, I think we also recognize the work is never done, and there are 29 other really smart clubs competing every single day to try to get better as well. But I'm excited about where we are. I like the group we have in the front office, and looking forward to continuing to work with them.
You guys obviously took some big swings, landed some big players in the winter, but there may be an outside perception that you guys didn't do a whole lot when it came to the starting rotation. How do you view the starting staff right now? Just what are your overall thoughts on the depth coming into spring training?
Yeah, I will say I feel much better about our starting pitching depth sitting here today than I did a year ago. We made that a priority. of our offseason. We brought in a number of players at all levels of free agency. I think we're at least coming into camp in a pretty good health spot. Doesn't mean we're going to stay healthy throughout the entire season. We know that doesn't happen, but we're coming into camp in a pretty good health spot. And so I feel good about our starting pitching depth.
David, with the announcement that you guys are bringing Drew back as well today, you've got a few pitchers that had Tommy John surgery mid-season last year.
Yeah.
The typical timetable would basically rule them out for this season as well, but with the advancements in some of the surgical techniques, the braces, are there more avenues for those guys to be considered potential options this year?
Look, I think with Drew, potentially in September, we don't want to rush this. Like we got to get it right. We'll have a better feel for that as we get into the summer months. So, I think that's possible, although we're not going to count on that. With Christian Scott, our plan is, he's not going to pitch in competition this year. So we'll use this year to make sure we get him right, and then have him full go in 26. Alzolay, unlikely. Yeah, unlikely this year. That's more of 26.
With Drew back, what's the value of just keeping him with the organization? Obviously this year being kind of a full rehab for him.
Yeah, he's been a long tenured Met who's given a lot to the organization. Is a good teammate, is a good pitcher, and so I think having continuity in his care, that he can be under our supervision for his rehab in a place that he's comfortable, where he trusts the medical staff, is important for both sides. And then hopefully this goes well and he's pitching big innings for us in 26.
You mentioned earlier the whole luxury tax, losing 10 spots in the draft thing. Payroll-wise, you guys ended up in the low, going on mid 300s, I believe, by the public estimations. Steve has said he doesn't want to go there every year.
Yeah.
How did where you guys have ended up now compared to sort of the early offseason conversations you guys had about options you had?
Yeah, I think going into any offseason, there are always different scenarios. So depending on who you're able to sign, who you're able to access, sort of dictates what level of payroll you're ultimately going to have. So this was certainly a scenario that we discussed. And there were other scenarios with lower payroll numbers that we discussed as well. You're right. I don't think as an organization we want to remain consistently this high. But in this offseason, given the opportunities that were in front of us, we had tremendous ownership support to get there. And I'm really grateful for that.
Were there any scenarios with a higher number?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, we plot out everything and anything. In this case, this was probably among the higher of the scenarios we plotted out. And I think the general path that this offseason took is one that makes sense for the organization at this time.
What do you think of what the Dodgers have done, not only in total payroll, but in one case, in Sasaki's case, luring in a guy who doesn't cost very much at all?
I think they've done a really good job. I mean, look, that's an organization that has had tremendous continuity now for over a decade. I think on all sides of their operation, they're run very well. They've had consistent success, and so that's great. That's great competition for us. They're a good organization, good team, and we're looking forward to competing against them.
I know you guys went for Yamamoto the previous off season, but what do you think about the perception that you probably like less the really long-term deals for even the star free agent pitchers? Because it didn't seem like there were three of them out there or more, and you didn't really play for
what
them.
I'd say is it's and I understand that perception is out there. It's always individual. Like we're always evaluating the individual and trying to understand what makes sense for the organization. We have approached starting pitchers on long-term deals, clearly not at values that secured them for us, but we don't have lines in the sand. We don't have hard and fast rules. I think we have philosophies. I think we try to do our best to be informed about sort of what the evidence is suggesting for us, but we're not drawing a line in the sand. And when there are players of any position that we think are worth the long-term investment in the construct of all the other investments we have with our club, we'll pursue them.
Based on what Tim said, I think based on the two teams' resources and the way people look at it on the outside, that you guys are in a sort of like arms race with the Dodgers. You compete for a lot of the same players. You have a lot of money. Do you guys look across the country and see what the Dodgers are doing, or do you guys try to focus more on your own division, the rivals? Like, how do you guys look at that sort of thing, competition-wise?
Both. We're not ignoring the Dodgers. I mean, we understand who they are in our game right now, and the success they've had, and that's great. But our primary focus needs to be on ourselves and how can we put the best team forward possible? How can we continue to improve organizationally in all aspects to have the type of continuity and sustained success that the Dodgers and some other organizations in our league have had? I think we're on the path to doing that.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.